Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Cinema.Engineering podcast. I'm here with my friends Christian, Ben, and Owen, and the subject of today is kind of what we're all about. Today, we're going to talk about subjective versus objective. So, subjective is what do you think? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Objective is give me the numbers, show me some engineering, prove to me that you've done something with a bit of integrity. So, who wants to kick off with their thoughts on subjective versus objective? Why don't you go first, Christian?
I think it's interesting that we have to define them within our industry, because a lot of what we talk about when we speak to clients is very subjective. We use a lot of analogies when we speak to clients about the type of systems that they want or the emotive responses that they imagine that their system is going to deliver to them. That is all based on emotion. It's
Give
based
me,
on
give me some
feeling.
examples of those words we use. What do you mean?
Well, we say, the type of system we want to sell you is like a Ferrari. And that's a direct comparison to a very high performance vehicle. But the performance of that vehicle and the brand of that vehicle evoke very subjective responses. They are influenced by personal taste, they're influenced by opinion, they're influenced by price, they're influenced by a lot of factors outside of a very objective review of said product. I think back to the stuff we used to do many years ago when we were kids or when we were at high school, and you had a deck of cards and they all had warplanes on them, or they had supercars in them. Top trumps, I think what they were called. And you used to know all the facts. My warship is 25 foot longer than yours. It has a gross tonnage of X, Y, and Z. And you used to play these games based on very objective information that is on these cards. And as we've sort of grown up and come around to working in this industry, everything that we end up doing and selling to a customer is quite subjective. It's an interesting one because we should be selling systems first and foremost based on the objectivity, not the subjectivity. But as humans, we are tactile, we are influenced, we are opinionated, and that stuff appeals to us. So it's a great topic. I think there's a lot that we can delve into, and the new standards that are being developed, and we've all sat and talked about over the last couple of years, will make some considerable changes and ruffle some feathers in our industry.
Ben, what do you think?
I hear all the time, when I beat the drum of, we have to base this on performance, we have to be able to predict it, we have to have da da da. But all my client cares about is the experience, as if performance and experience are mutually exclusive. It's insane. And if we're trying to deliver artistic intent, what the creator wanted and what's on the disc, we buy a film, what is on that disc? So if our job is to recreate that artistic intent, how can we possibly separate the experience from a performance? So would I sit in front of an end user and just talk facts? No, that's not going to be the right kind of sales process. People are very emotive. The Ferrari, it's not just about the 0 to 60 time. It's about the fact it's a Ferrari and all the beautiful trimmings that come with it. So yeah, I think it's I just think there's been a real loss of facts from our industry, and it's time we bring them back.
Owen.
Well, yeah, it's because it's exactly this. It's because you have an emotional response to the film you're watching. It's all about how it makes you feel. It's all about dialing up the emotional experience. But the fact remains, Ferrari don't do it on gut feel. They don't try a few different ways of organizing the engine. They absolutely have engineers and scientists behind it, and we need to be more like that, because that is the route to the heightened emotional response, right? It's the cinema that's accurate. It's the bass that's even. It's the spatial cues that are coming from all the right places, not just, that'll do because I feel like that'll do. Well, who are you to say? We've got this massive body of science underpinning the lot from Freud, Toole and onwards. he even did the studies. He even got people in, right, and played them stuff. And the fact is, the more accurate stuff does create an emotional response, because that's been proven by hundreds of people, as opposed to one integrator going by their gut feel, or one integrator going, I need a design, I'm doing a quote, can you turn it around in 24 hours, please? And guess what? That quote is full of compromises, and you're doing the wrong thing by the client for that money. Yeah, I feel emotional about it. I'm passionate that we should actually do things properly and by the book. You know,
I want to go back to something that Christian said, because Christian said two really interesting words. He used the word product, and then he talked about Ferraris. And what gets me about this industry is that we as an industry, us people that create these systems, we are obsessed with products. What we should be obsessed about is the product that we are delivering to that customer, which is the room. Just like a Ferrari is the totality of the experience of all the different components that go up to make it. We leave that to Ferrari. Yeah, we have some options. What color would you like it? What upholstery would you like? But very, very, very few of the engineering options are down to us as the Ferrari customers. I mean, I say us as Ferrari customers. None of us are Ferrari customers. Maybe one day. But when you buy a Ferrari, you're buying a Ferrari because, exactly as Owen said, that thing has been engineering designed by some incredibly talented engineers that have put together all the constituent parts to give you that totality of experience, which is a Ferrari and the Ferrari brand. So when we talk product as an industry, I don't think we should be talking components. And there's a difference between product and components. The components that make up what we do are the projector, are the screen, are the speakers, are the subwoofers, are the processors, are the amplifiers, are the acoustic elements, all the control system, the chairs, the little plug-in port to charge your phone if you want. Those are the components. The product is the totality of the experience, where all of those components come together to deliver you something that is technically good enough to reproduce artistic intent and therefore deliver an emotional response. So I want to continue this conversation with how might we as an industry get away from the discussion about components and more over to the discussion that subjective versus objective of the totality of the experience of the whole thing we deliver. Going back to an architect, when you have a first conversation with an architect, they don't talk about bricks. They don't talk about sliding doors. They don't talk about who's going to make the kitchen. They talk about the totality of the experience and how that building is going to enhance the lives of the users. Yet, as an industry, most plow in there at the beginning with, oh, this projector's brilliant, and I know this guy, he's really funny, and he took me on a skiing trip, so I'm going to specify his loudspeakers. Sorry, that's not what Ferrari do. That's not what BMW do. That's not what Audi do. They focus on the product, the end result. So, Christian, tell me more about the product.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit and step back to the original discussion or the original, question of subjective versus objective, because there's a small part of this that is very interesting, and that is that a lot of these customers that we are delivering these experiences to potentially also use an interior decorator, and an interior decorator or an interior architect. Their entire remit is based on subjectivity, not objectivity, because it's the final experience of how it's perceived by the customer. Whether the sofa comes from brand X or brand Y, as long as it's available in teal and it's 4'2" wide or tall and fits into that alcove that they've designed in the room.
I'm going to re-challenge your challenge in a second. We're going to have a game of challenge tennis here.
Excellent. Do we get a Game of Thrones type introduction for it? But we'll anyway. Interior decorators.
We can't that animation. No.
Bugger. The subjective objective aspect to it is based around product, yes. But we, very similar to what we said in the first podcast, it comes down to the recipe. It comes down to the ingredients. It comes down to the overall how you put the the stuff together, and that is based on the performance factor of those various components. It's a difficult one because as industry people, we have been educated on product. We've been sold on product. We use product every single day to combine together to form these experiences. Our clients are ever the more able to procure those products directly. The margins are eroding. The mass retailers are selling more and more of that product. They are making it out to be more and more easy to install and integrate and do it yourself. So we're stuck with the challenge of how to differentiate yourself. And wearing my first hat as Sphere Custom and a distribution agency or a distribution company, it's a challenge to sell product to dealers because you are constantly and continuously being undercut by a product which supposedly does exactly the same thing, but it doesn't actually when you've measured it and you've calibrated it and you've set it up and you've taken all the other constraints into account. By that time, you've most likely bored the hell out of the client and off you go. You've potentially lost a sale. So it is difficult. You have to balance the subjectivity with the objectivity, and that is a balance of compromise. It's a continual daily challenge in our industry.
And my challenge back to you is I kind of disagree with this whole thing around interior designers, because in everything an interior designer does, well, most things, apart from these entertainment spaces, they follow function all the time. They put doors in sensible places for doors. When they're designing a kitchen, they make sure that the sink is quite close to the cooker so that you can drain things. You're not walking 20 meters across the other side of the kitchen. They're already used to going, okay, this is a space that has a set of use modes, and the use modes need to be satisfied. With a cinema, I think the issue with interior designers is I don't think they're obstructive. I don't think they're assholes. I think, pretty much everyone I've ever met, they have been really, really, really fantastic people with a design vision, and they genuinely want to do the best things with their customers. I just don't think they've ever been educated. They understand the flow of a kitchen. They understand the flow of a living room. They understand, how a bathroom, and when I say bathroom, I'm using the European definition of that, not the silly American one, where you actually never have a bath in an American bathroom. You do other things in it. So the European definition of a bathroom, that you actually have a bath or a shower in, they understand functionally how those spaces need to be laid out, but they've just never been educated. They've just not got the awareness. So I'd like to throw those lovely interior designers and architects a bone. And contrary to popular belief, I don't think they're evil. I think, everyone I've ever met is bloody fantastic. They just want to do a good job, but they've never been made aware. Ben, what do you think?
I mean, on that point, I think that's another thing that, as an industry, as a wider industry, we get wrong. That it's too easy to think that the interior designer, the architect, are just there to make things pretty. Oh, we sell the tech, we do the important bit. They just make stuff pretty. And as you say, of course they don't. The kitchen designer absolutely is putting functionality at the heart of what they do. Of course it needs to be pretty. But the colour choice is the last part. When you choose a kitchen, I want a Hague blue kitchen. Doesn't really matter. We need to know where the sink's going, where's the oven going, where's the hob going, where's the fridge going. Those are the things that are the important engineering of the kitchen, and the colour is just the irrelevant last choice. So we've got into a world where I know a lot of, certainly in the UK, I know the UK market better than overseas markets, but in the UK market, there is a real drive to sell cinemas based on the look of it, the look and feel. So does Instagram sell my next job? And it's a really interesting point, because actually Instagram is probably the best lead generator now for our industry. If the rooms aren't pretty, you're not going to get work.
But I think it's really funny that the best Instagram cinema from last year was also one of the most technically accurate, and Ben did it. Because nobody knows. Everyone just goes, "Wow, triangles! It's amazing!" And it's like, yes, it is. I've seen the entry, but You don't know that. You're just seeing these cool triangles and going, so of course you can have both. Sorry, Ben, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it bugs me a little bit with that room that all anyone wanted to talk about was the fact that it was pretty, and yeah, it was pretty, and that shouldn't be. Pretty isn't a compromise. Pretty is a necessity. The room has to be pretty. It has to provide the first wow. If the client walks in and doesn't get that first wow, the first whole chunk of the emotional response isn't there. So pretty is a necessity. I often work, have an interior designer do the room concept already. They're doing the rest of the house. So I only have to do the tech bit. Why am I being judged on how pretty the room is if someone else designed that?
So we've spent nearly 19 minutes talking about the fluffy stuff and talking about interior designers, and let's really delve into this objective versus subjective. Who wants a Christian? Give me an example of an objective definition of performance that directly links to the reproduction of creative intent and therefore emotional response.
Projector foot lamberts. How bright is the screen? There are many ways to calculate that number. There are many factors that influence the final number, but the industry has a reference, in inverted commas, to achieve. Dolby set the standard. If you want to have really, really good HDR reproduction on a projection-based display, you should be able to measure between, let's say, 30 and 40 foot lamberts on screen when you've completed your installation. That is an objective and verifiable measurement that you can make once the cinema is completed. Should your client have gone with a projection screen and a projector and all the other things and trappings and trimmings that go with it? The difficulty that we have is from a subjective perspective and a marketing perspective, we have loads of companies saying that their projector is good enough to put HDR on a 220-inch screen. And that's what we eat up. We look at it, we say, well, yeah, that's great. The image looks fine. But the minute you introduce, a real small crack in the window where you've got the curtains not lining up correctly and there's a little ingress of light from outside, completely ruins the image, completely shatters that illusion. It doesn't immerse you. There are reasons that particular level of light output has been measured and verified, and why we know it allows us to engross ourselves in the content that we are watching. That is objective and verified. It's been done through scientific testing and A/B, testing with people to say, I perceive this image to be better than that image. And why is that? It's because better pixels are better for you than more pixels. Brighter pixels with better contrast and better brightness and more dynamic range in the image creates a more inviting image to look at.
Owen, can you give me another example?
Wide speakers.
Apart from the fact you're muted.
Thank you. So, as you can tell, I'm in a working environment. So there's quite a bit of just background stuff.
What you work for a living? You don't just talk about this shit. You actually do it for a living.
Sometimes, but obviously my current project, which we don't want to talk about, is involving another business who are all quite busy doing stock out the door type stuff. So
are you building a showroom, Owen?
They do it.
He hasn't said that, has he?
No, definitely not. Maybe. A little bit.
More on Owen's showroom in a future episode.
Actually, though, there's one that you can sort of prove. Where do the subwoofers go? There's loads of maths around that. You can absolutely, based on the room width, height, and depth, create a mathematical model using easily available software by a guy who used to be the technical director of the company I was working for, a guy called John Mulcahy, who was the technical director for the experiment that was Tag McLaren Audio back in the day, about 20 years ago. When you do that, you can literally virtually experiment with subwoofer placement, and you can find out at the seats where will the bass be most accurate, or where will it be most lumpy and bumpy. And of course, if the bass is lumpy and bumpy, it's no good. Because if I play you a scale on a bass guitar, a couple of notes will be missing and a couple of other notes will be too loud. And you will say to me, Owen, you're not very good. So all of that is objectively true. And therefore, that's very much influenced where we put the subwoofers for client projects. Where's it going to sound good? Where's it going to sound even? This has nothing to do with how you feel about it. And this has nothing to do with in your experience, because obviously you don't do identically dimensioned rooms. I'm doing a project right now where the room's gone from 8 meters long to 7 meters long to sort of 6.5, depending on where we put the projection booth. And the subs have gone from the front to the back to the front to the back again, depending on each dimensional change. But what's nice is we can prove that, we can absolutely establish that way before we do anything with a drill, and therefore we can sort of relax about it. So that's very much grounded in science, super easy to do. Lots of people don't do it, if that makes sense.
You mean we don't have to crawl around and crawl around on the floor to find the best part where the subwoofer is the
You can even push the sub around during the install to work out where it's going to go and where it's best on your hands and knees. It's quite heavy and it might be a bit dusty. You can absolutely do that, but I'm not going to.
Well, there's two episodes in the future right there. Episode 1, where do your subwoofers go? Episode 2, because I'm going to slightly disagree with Owen, and this is going to be a great conversation and episode. Can you actually model a room, or are all the room modeling software just complete nonsense? And yeah, I think that's a great discussion. Ben, give me an example of objectivity and how it relates to experience.
So, the bits that I like the most are, as Owen said earlier, where they've already been referenced back to sort of proven experiments to show that when we take a performance level of something that is predictable, that is measurable and verifiable, that we've got research that shows that the big percentage of the population will prefer that. So there's, we could take 10 brands of speakers in a hi-fi store, plug them in, and somebody will prefer each one. Hi-fi is still a very subjective business. There's not right or wrong. But once we get into a cinema, one of the things that we, in the working group that the four of us are all in, have a metric for now is the consistency from seat to seat. Or as Owen calls it, his oh shit moment. Because the first time you calculate that, you realise that every piece of work you've ever done before was not really good enough. It's just a fact. So I guess when people start building cinema type rooms, they're probably doing it for themselves, and there's only one seat that matters. So if you put speakers sort of in the wrong place and point them in the wrong direction and they're not quite spec'd right, you can still normally make one seat sound pretty good. You can EQ speakers beyond what they really should do. It's not ideal, but you can often get one seat to sound okay. As soon as you EQ a speaker, absolutely out there on the limits. The things it was doing right in another seat, it's now doing wrong, and all of a sudden you've got a real big problem across your audience. So one of the measures that I really like is looking at what is the volume difference, the SPL difference from one seat to another. What are the frequency response from one seat to another? And we can predict it, we can measure it, we can verify it. And this is the difference from that DIY guy in his basement making one seat sound quite good to us trying to take a shared experience that will be, husband and wife date night, or it's movie with the kids, or you've got your friends over. And movies are social. Even if we're not talking in a film, it's a social experience, and that whole thing is to be shared. So I love the objective metrics that let us guarantee an experience to an entire audience. That's a cinema. That's not just one guy in front of a telly
100%.
anymore.
And your auntie will never say. If your auntie is sitting on a back row and she's got a surround back left speaker that's far too loud and it's to the right of her because she's on that over the edge seat, she's never going to say, because she's never going to know that one speaker behind me is much too loud, it's completely ruining the film. She's much too polite. And of course she doesn't know enough to say, because you're the only one in your friend group with a cinema, and she's going, wow, that was amazing. And she's thinking in the back of her mind, bloody hell, that speaker behind me was too loud. You will never get told, we have to do this for you. We have to make it so that your auntie gets a good experience.
And in small rooms that happens really quickly. I've got a room that we did earlier this year that only has 3 seats in it, but the room is small. It's about 3.8 meters before we did the sound isolation, before we did any treatment of any kind. Finished room is small. And even with 3 seats, those surround speakers, if you're not careful of how you treat them, where you put them, how the whole system's put together and calibrated and EQ'd, one person in the middle, great experience. Person either side, terrible experience. They've got a speaker like a headphone right in their ear. They can't hear anything else. All you're getting, dialogue's gone. You're just getting sound effects from that speaker that's right by you. So it's, as the room gets bigger, it actually becomes easier in a way. If in a commercial cinema, we're covering a huge audience. It's not as tricky to get from one seat to another. But the smaller the room gets, the quicker those differences from one seat to another really, really mount up. Just point the speakers in the right direction. That's like the first thing. Just do that bit. That will really help.
I want to come back to something you mentioned, Ben, which is the hi-fi, the world of hi-fi, which is my background. It's Christian's background. It's kind of Owen's background. Ben, you've been let off this.
I did my time in retail, high street retail. I've done my time.
Okay, we've all been there. We've all done it. We've all served our porridge. And the thing is with hi-fi, and I always find hi-fi reviews of speakers hysterical, because back when I started in the hi-fi business back in 1990, I'm going to make myself, I'm going to age myself here. Started in the industry working for a 2-channel hi-fi store in 1990. I was always really, really puzzled how a system could sound staggeringly good in one room. You took that exact system and put it in a different room, and it was awful. If I knew now what I knew then, I could give you, we could talk a week about the reasons why. And a lot of it is just how loudspeakers interact with rooms. That a way a loudspeaker interacts with one room and it sounds fantastic. If you put that loudspeaker in a completely different room where the surfaces are different, the surfaces are in a different place, the room is in a different size, the seating location is different, the way that loudspeaker is throwing sound out into the room, and speakers don't just throw sound out the front, they don't throw sound out evenly all around. It's a massively complex how a loudspeaker puts that energy into a space. And the way it puts the energy into a space will profoundly affect the way that loudspeaker sounds in that space. Now, from an objective point of view, what we want data about how a loudspeaker puts its sound energy into a space, so we can then make a prediction on, is that the right loudspeaker for that particular environment? How's it going to behave? So a review of one speaker when someone says, this is the best speaker in the world, well, it's just totally subjective. That person at that moment playing that particular content of music from that particular source, through that amplification, through those cables, in that room, furnished in that particular way, with the speakers in that particular position, and them sitting there, their opinion was it sounded really good. You transplant those speakers somewhere different, and another person's opinion might be, this is the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. And this is the whole point of this objectivity versus subjectivity, that taking an objective engineering approach allows people like the four of us to make a damn good prediction on how good that system is going to be. And it isn't just, as we've all been saying, it's not just numbers for the sake of numbers. It's numbers to justify the emotional response. Just like a Ferrari has a highly engineered set of numbers that come together to give you the totality of the experience of that Ferrari, this must become the norm in this industry. But for the world of hi-fi, I just fear that that's kind of lost. That's just never going to happen. It's that snake oil. It's voodoo. It's speaker cables costing £150,000 a pair. That's
I
not
sort
objective.
of, I sort of disagree with that, because I think hi-fi actually can teach us a lot of things. We have a difficulty because we deal with more than two loudspeakers at a time. Surround sound, by definition, is more than just one or two loudspeakers.
Surround sound, how
E-
quaint.
exactly. But when you look at a stereo system, and many years ago, when again in the hi-fi industry, you were able to do the home demonstration, and that to me was the secret sauce, because you'd effectively take that loudspeaker that you didn't have any of the objective merits or verification for, because it was in your sound room at your store that you showed, exactly as you've just indicated, Peter. Those parameters were outside of the client's control. But the minute you took those loudspeakers into the client's own house and set them up in his own lounge with his own setup, you had a much more, wouldn't say it's objective, but it's very definitely more measurable A versus B to his existing setup. And that encouraged the purchase. So you'd leave the loudspeakers there over the weekend, and Monday morning you'd go around and you'd say, what did you think of them? And you'd plug his old ones back in, and he'd go, oh, I'm sorry, I can't listen to the old ones anymore. I just leave them here. Here's the check. Thank you very much. We can't, unfortunately, do that in home cinema, because we can't lug all these loudspeakers around to every client's house. So what are we meant to do? And I think that takes us to another podcast potentially, the discussion of showrooms and how we may look around and judge specific different showrooms on the different merits or the objectivity that they've put into putting those showrooms together. Is it led, wearing the distributor's hat again, is it led by the brands that the distributor is distributing? And is it put together in such a manner to influence, showcase the performance of and the brilliance of those individual products combined together in a recipe that works? Or is it based on the performance and the objective performance measured, and not based on those products? Because that's an interesting discussion for another day. But yeah, that's effectively where we go. We can't do the home demonstration.
I think this podcast could just as easily have been called Zen and the Art of Audio-Based Car Analogies, because I'm going to use one to my thoughts on what you just said, Christian, and that is that the previous pair of speakers were a Hyundai i10. Great, well engineered, sounded good. You brought in a pair of speakers that then gave him Hyundai i20 levels of performance at BMW 5 Series price. Now that customer is going to go, whoa, these are miles better. Yeah, this is great. I will buy them. I heard a profound difference. But at the price they paid, how does that dealer know that those actually were the best pair of speakers that could possibly work in that room for that level of price? And as you say, that's what we have to do as cinema designers, because we don't have the opportunity of doing a home dem. We've got to take all of the compromises inherent to the system. There's always compromises, the biggest ones being budget and basically space requirements. We've got to take those compromises and engineer and then specify what we think is going to deliver the absolute best performance objectively. So when the client hears that system, they're going to go, wow, that is a BMW M5, and they're paying M5 money. They're getting M5 performance. Could it be even better? Could it be a Ferrari? Well, the problem with most Ferraris is they only seat 2 people, and that BMW M5 seats 5 people. I did a talk at the EI Live show a few days ago, which was entitled "So What's Reference Exactly?" And none of you 3 bastards actually
I've got an
turned
excuse.
up
I just
to
can't
it.
tell you what it is.
Thought you were my friends, but we were talking about all the work that all 3 of us participate in CEDIA standards, and this whole discussion around, yeah, but my client likes it. My client listened to it and they thought it was fantastic. Sorry, that's not good enough. And one slide I had up there basically said, if you want a Porsche 911, don't buy a van. If you need to carry loads of stuff, don't buy a Porsche 911, because that's another compromise, and that's where subjective versus objective. It's got to be an objectively engineered, provable thing that
So
we
your
deliver.
use of that word reference actually gives me my point that one of the bigger differences still between music and movies is the way they're consumed. So for music, nobody has a reference system, and I don't mean reference in the term of a performance level, but you listen to some of it at home through a multi-room system. You listen to it in the car. You might go out to a nightclub, a rock concert. That music sounds different every single time, and there is no reference listening environment that is deemed to be the correct environment to listen to that music for emotional response. Have you ever heard a dance music track, if you've not heard it in Ibiza, on some crazy big insane sound system? That's what it was meant to do. That's the emotional response from that song is, are you in Ibiza having a great time? Not, are you driving around the M25 listening on your not very good car radio? So music doesn't have reference systems like we do. We're lucky in cinema that commercial standards exist. Not all commercial cinemas meet them, and they're all a bit different. But a client will have, to some extent, knowledge of a reference. It might be their local cinema, it might be a good cinema, but we can benchmark against that. So selling a hi-fi, do you want loads of bass or not too much bass? There's so many options because they're all better than your car, but we've got a good benchmark to work to, and that benchmark comes from performance facts. It's got, the commercial cinema, we know roughly what they were trying to do. So if a client says to me, I want this room to be better than another cinema that, the cinema I visit, well, that's predictable. I can work out if I can make it better. I can't work out if I can make a hi-fi better than any other hi-fi because it wasn't based on facts.
Yeah, but surely those speakers that are in that famous London recording studio, surely because that famous London recording studio uses those speakers, they're the best speakers in the world, and those are reference speakers.
So I've only
Isn't
worked
that true?
really in one studio. I've got one client who is a record producer, so I've done some work in their studio. And the funny thing about that studio, because everyone always says, I replicate the studio. Well, in fact, they don't themselves. We put multiple hi-fis around the property. They master in the studio and they go and listen to it on hi-fis because clients don't listen on studios. So
They also listen to it in their cars. Most good mastering engineers will take that and they will listen
exactly
to it
that.
in their car. And yeah, you've nailed it. In the music world, I love I love it because it's just hysterical and so wrong when people say, "Oh, this system's accurate." Accurate to what? What is the reference? The musician that was playing the violin, the person that was standing next to the musician playing the violin, someone who was standing at the back of the hall listening to the person playing the violin, someone who was in the recording studio control room listening through that violin through a certain microphone that was placed at a certain place, listening to that violin, the person who was at the back of that control room, the person who was in the mixing room, the person who was in the mastering room, at which particular point in that whole music production process can you consider it reference? The idea of accuracy in music, Henri, what's his name? Cartier-Bresson. Thank you, Henri Cartier-Bresson, very famous photographer. He once came up with a quote that sharpness is a bourgeois concept, and I know that's all very highbrow and philosophical, but in music, accuracy is a bourgeois concept. There is no such thing as accuracy. So we as engineers should never ever ever say about any system, this is accurate, because accurate to what? And that's the essential conversation. Owen.
Yeah, a couple of other bits. People who use the studio conceit are often, speaking totally objectively, a bunch of charlatans, right? Because firstly, the most popular studio monitoring speaker, bar none, is a Yamaha NS10.
Time, weather, and
I'll say that again. To be candid, they're completely shit. They're really good at pulling apart the holes in the mid-range, and so they really help you fix it in the mix. So they're a tool with a value, completely fine. If you put 5 and more of those around you in a cinema, you're just going to go, well, this isn't very good. The other one is that I remember watching some adverts recently. I can't remember who they were by. And they said, oh, we are used in studios to create the films themselves. It's like, yes, and I know exactly when that was. Used by Lucasfilm when he was having a slightly bad time to create things like The Phantom Menace with Jar Jar Binks. Yes, sign me up. I'll have some of those. Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, final, we're 47 minutes in now. Final comments from each of you. Christian.
I think overall, what we've discussed and what it comes down to is how people feel and how we can make them feel. Having something that is objective means we have, as you were indicating, Ben, we've got a benchmark with which to gauge and to gauge against. We have something that we can utilize to build upon and create an experience. And that, for me, that's all it's about. Whether the experience is watching a movie on an iPad while you're on a train on your way to holiday destination X, Y, or Z with some headphones on, or you are sitting behind a pair of loudspeakers at a desk doing work but listening to music, or you're kicking back in a cinema with a 4-meter wide screen and you're really enjoying it with your mates. It's the sum of its parts. It is the totality of that experience, and that is what counts. And it's a balance between objectivity that drives the subjectivity.
Ben.
For me, it all comes down to predictability. That's the reason that we have all of our objective criteria is to make it predictable. Every single room, I think we said it in the first episode, every single room is an alpha test. It's the first time we've ever tried that room in those dimensions and those materials. So if we were just making subjective, these speakers are great, that amplifier is brilliant, we could never, ever predict what would happen when we put that system together. So the objective performance-based setup gives us a fighting chance to make sure the system will deliver the emotive response and it's going to provide that great experience on paper. We have to get it right on paper because it's too late once we've built it.
Final word to Owen.
It's sort of a bit weird and a bit contradictory, but if you want to maximize the emotional response in your client, in your room, in that system, in that experience, you have to put your emotions away and put your preconceptions and your loyalties away and follow the science and do the sums, because then it will actually be good.
We have been the Cinema.Engineering crew. If you like what we do, please press the subscribe button. If you have any suggestions or want us to talk about anything at all, stick it in the comments. They're all laughing because I'm old and grey, and I'm being all sort of teenager and social media-y by pointing downwards, in this YouTube kind of way. I don't know what I'm doing.
Are we on YouTube? I thought we were on Toptic.
Toptic, that's it. That one there. But anyway, look, we want this to be a discussion. So please let us know what you think. Please let us know what you want to talk about, and we will see you again next week. Bye bye.